All right. Hi, I'm James Brandenburg. I'm the chair for Arkansas Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. And we want to welcome you to our fall Getting Ready to Hunt series. We're still working on a title for this. We've kicked it around about 15 times, and I think it's different every time we do it.
Yeah.
But what we want to do with this series is act as a way to welcome some folks into the outdoors, into the backcountry who maybe haven't had that experience before. We're going to use my experience as kind of the example here. I've been hunting for about 10 years. I don't ever claim to be the world's most badass hunter, but I love to get out and do it. And after scratching the itch a little bit and going out for a very basic western hunt a couple years ago, Rick, I just kind of felt like there was adventure to be had here in Arkansas. And
Definitely.
after getting out and scouting around a little bit so far, I am so excited to get out this fall and really get into the backcountry and see what we have to offer. So that's my background. I am a pretty novice hunter. I'm going to be archery hunting this fall. Hope to take a bear or a deer. Basically what presents the opportunity for me.
Yep.
And Rick, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little
Sure.
bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Rick Spicer. I'm from Arkansas. Been a hunter and angler in Arkansas pretty much my whole life. I am the equipment buyer and part owner of the Pack Rat Outdoor Center in Fayetteville. That's where we are this evening. And in addition to that, I'm a board member for the Arkansas BHA, and so that's kind of where this idea started. James and I started, knocking the idea around and said, hey, how can we maybe provide some information and education for other Arkansas hunters that maybe have a strong background in hunting, but maybe not quite as familiar with some of the camping and backcountry tools that they might need if they want to go a little further.
Yep.
So
Yeah, exactly.
That's what this is about.
That pretty much describes me. So to give you some background on kind of where we're going to take this, we'll have different subjects. We're going to aim for 15 to 20 minutes, and hopefully we can cover some things. And our goal here is to cover things that are going to help you as a we don't want to say a novice necessarily, but help you overcome some of the learning curve that's there to get out and do things safely and in an enjoyable way, so you don't make critical mistakes, so that you know how to maybe solve some issues that you run into in the field, and also hopefully you can do it in a way that doesn't break the bank.
Absolutely.
So we're going to cover in this video tonight, we're going to cover boots and footwear. We'll hit some issues. We got my well-used pair of Scarpas sitting here, but we're going to kind of kick it to Rick and let him just tell us some things that we need to be aware of when we're thinking about footwear, and then we'll have other subjects that we cover along the way in subsequent weeks. So Rick,
Cool.
We're getting ready to go out in the backcountry in Arkansas.
Yeah.
And I'm from up here in northwest Arkansas, so we like to think we're in the mountains a little bit here in the Bentonville, Fayetteville area, but you get a little bit off the trails here and it gets rugged in a hurry.
It sure can. We've got some very rugged terrain here in the Ozarks, as they do down in the Ouachitas and some other parts of the state. And a lot of the hunters that I know, myself included, like to wear tall rubber boots, and we do that for multiple reasons. They keep our feet dry. They can keep us warm if they're insulated properly. They obviously have a scent component, where they don't transfer our scent to the ground. So they make a lot of sense in a lot of hunting situations. But when you get, in situations where you need a lot of support out of your footwear, and you're going to be hiking longer distances and more rugged terrain, a lot of times those rubber boots don't seem to get the job done quite as well. It doesn't mean you can't do it, but from my experience anyway, and other hunters that I've spoken with over the years, you're less sure-footed in those type, because you don't have a lacing system on that type of footwear typically, that you can control the fit of the boot as well. And so there's a few points that I thought it would be useful and hopefully helpful for people that we can talk about when it comes to footwear. So one of the first things that I would encourage you to do if you've never done it was to go get your foot measured, actually. And there's a device that's called a Brannick. And if you've never had your foot measured on a Brannick, it's a really good thing to do. And the reason for that is most of us think about our foot being a certain size, and that size is from the back of your heel to the tip of your toes, right? Mm-hmm. And certainly that's one size, but the other good thing about a Brannick is it can measure your foot in two other ways. Another way is going to be what we call heel to ball. So the ball of your foot, kind of back behind your big toe, that's a different measurement. And for a lot of folks, the heel to toe and the heel to ball are not exactly the same.
Yeah, that's me for sure.
Right, and that can be problematic because the hinge point in the boot, everybody knows you've got the boot and it bends at a particular point right here. If you bought the boot based on your heel to toe, but your heel to ball is significantly different, then the boot might not fit optimally for you.
Right.
And the other thing the Brannick can do is to measure width. And there is a lot of footwear on the market nowadays that is available in widths. And so it makes a lot of sense, I think, to start out with a baseline of a solid measurement for your foot. It doesn't mean that you can't go somewhere and just sort of try things on and go by feel. But a lot of people, I think, will be surprised to know what their foot measurements are if they actually go get measured. Now, the other thing to understand about boots is just because you wear a 10.5 in one brand doesn't mean you're going to wear a 10.5 in another brand, because when these companies build boots, they have what's called a last. And the last is usually carved out of wood or something like that. And it's the mold that the shoe goes around. But not all the lasts are the same. And this is not like a standardized unit or anything like that. And so some manufacturers' 10s are going to be a little more volume than others. The length could even be slightly different, certainly the width. And so, whether you're coming into a store like this, or whether you're on a website and you're using a message option where you're speaking directly to a company to get advice on fit, those are all questions that you should be prepared to ask. And in an ideal situation, you would have those sizes kind of worked out ahead of time.
Yep. I'll say that in my experience, I've gone through different boots, and we didn't state this explicitly at the beginning, but the reason why your boots are so important, besides support, if you're hunting in the backcountry, they're essentially your engine to get you where you need to go.
Yep.
And so they're your engine and your tires.
They're the tires, yeah.
And if you lose contact with the ground, or you can't, you blow it out or whatever, you're done. It's very hard to crawl out of the woods or slither or whatever. So, but I've gone through a lot of different boots, and before I went out on this Western hunt, I realized that the boots that I had were too short for me. Mm-hmm. And so even, I wasn't doing a lot of backcountry hunting, but I was still in the hills a little bit, and I was banging my toes on the front of my boots.
Yep, absolutely.
So what I did when I was ordering online is I went through Zappos. Mm-hmm. And so I would order 2 or 3 pair at a time, and I could try the different sizes. Yep. And then it's kind of like starting with a funnel and working your way down.
Yep.
And it takes some time, and you got to be willing to lay out. In my case, I think I spent maybe $500 at a time, and then sent them back and got refunded.
Yeah, and and not only time in the sense of the sending back and forth or whatever, but just I would also encourage people not to rush a decision when they're purchasing footwear.
Right.
You really do want to give yourself time to get measured, try on different things, and the other thing that I hear a lot is most of us get advice from our friends, or from other acquaintances. And you can get away on other pieces of equipment sometimes, like a tent or a backpack. Well, backpack's maybe not even the best example, because it also is a fitted piece of equipment. But the thing about footwear is it's so specific to the individual. Like, just because I ask, a guy here, and I ask another guy here, and they've had great experience with one, type of shoe, their feet are very likely very different than mine, both in length, width, volume, and all these things. And so just because a boot worked great for them doesn't really the only thing advice-wise you can get from someone potentially is like durability. Someone can attest to how well a boot has held up, and that's a good. I would encourage people to talk to friends and things about that. But when it comes to fit issues, just take that with a grain of salt, because your feet are your own, and you really need to take all the steps that you can in the fit process to make sure you get them dialed in as good as you can.
Yeah. So you need to leave yourself enough time to get out. First of all, try different boots on.
Right.
Don't rush that process. Find something that fits you well. Get measured.
Yep.
And make sure that you're starting from a good point of knowing where you are, and then try on different things as you go along. So now let's say that you've gone through that process. Is there anything else that you feel like in that process that's really, I know that there's a couple other things you wanted to cover in that process.
Sure. So obviously getting measured and trying on different sizes and sort of narrowing that down. But that really, for the most part, what we're talking about there is length and width in the shoe. There are some things you can do to boots, though, and one of the most easy things that you can do is add a aftermarket footbed, or a lot of people refer to it as an insole. Most companies, the insole that is provided in the footwear is little more than some padding. It's a piece of foam. It doesn't offer a lot of support. And so whether you're a high arch person, middle arch, low arch, flat footed, whatever it is, you may benefit from a trade out in the footbed that comes with that shoe. And so, like, one brand that I'm familiar with that we've used a lot is Superfeet. And Superfeet makes a product. They've got I think it's a 60-day guarantee on those, so it's no risk as far as you put them in your boots. You go hike, do your thing, and even a month later, if you're unhappy with them, you can send them back. And so that's something that can provide additional support where maybe the boot itself isn't providing quite enough support. It can take up volume in the shoe. So maybe you've got a boot that you like, it feels good underneath, and the length is right, but there's too much volume over the top of the boot here. And so what you can do with an aftermarket footbed is raise your foot up slightly, get more padding underneath you, and then decrease volume through the top of the shoe. And that can work for some people. Having said that, you don't want to raise too high, right?
Yep.
The higher you raise, the further your foot gets away from the ground. It can potentially make it a little more unstable. So you want to look for that kind of happy medium spot. And you've just got to try stuff in order to find it.
So am I going to be able to go to a big box store and find a footbed that, an aftermarket footbed that I can get that kind of guarantee? Or do I need to be willing to lean in a little bit on something like that?
I think that you need to be ready to, ask these types of questions, whether it's to a sales associate at a shop, whether that's a big shop like a Cabela's or a Bass Pro, or a small shop like ours, or you're online talking to somebody trying to answer these questions for you. But they need to be able to answer these questions and help you narrow down your choices, and if you go, I'm not going to knock on big box stores or anything like that, but if they don't have people that have been trained to fit and they don't have other solutions for you, then you may very well need to go somewhere else to get those questions answered.
I've had great experiences and terrible experiences in all kinds of places.
Yeah, I mean,
it really is. It's a relationship with the salesperson.
It is,
and understanding what you're looking for, and standing up for yourself a little bit. I mean, this is going to be your connection to the ground. It's going to be the way that you get out where you want to go. So you've got to be willing to advocate for yourself a little bit. I mean, it seems weird to say, stand up for yourself and really get a good fitting pair of boots, but it can ruin a hunt.
It can, and again, that person, what are their motives, right? Are they on some kind of commission and getting X brand is going to hook them up somehow if they sell that brand, So it's worth going in a place where you feel like the person has your best interest in mind. And the main piece of advice I'd give you there is just make sure they're listening to you. They should be able to sort of regurgitate back all of the things that you've told them, and take the information you've given them and provide good feedback. And if they're struggling to do that, you might look around and see if you can find somebody that can help you down the road a little bit more.
How do I go into a store and figure out how this boot here in the store is going to perform when I'm out there hiking around?
Yeah, that's a great question. So obviously it's a completely different experience to walk on a flat surface in a shop than it is to be in the woods, climbing up the side of a hill or something like that. And so another thing I would look for is actually like various terrain inside a shop, A lot of good boot fitting shops will have incline planes that you can stand on, so you can get side hilling, uphill, downhill feel, so you can tell if your feet are actually, sliding down and your toes running into the toe box of the shoe. Does the boot feel good on your ankles as you're side hilling? Are your heels lifting if they're coming up? So you need some type of different terrain in order to see what the boot's doing. And you need to be in a place where they're comfortable with you keeping those boots on for a little while. Again, you don't want to rush the process, and it could take a few times in order to get all that down. Mm-hmm. But the key thing there is don't be afraid to try multiple brands. Just because it's a brand you've never heard of before doesn't mean that it's not any good. There are some really good footwear brands out there that are not what I would call like mainstream. It's not a big brand name. Sometimes the coolest stuff comes from small companies, because they're trying to grow. They're eager. They want to put the
depend
best
on every sale,
right? And they want to put the best product out there that they can. But having said that, I'm also not against a big company. Either. If it's a good product, it's a good product.
Right.
I'm not here to push one brand or another as much as I am encouraging people to try different brands.
Okay.
Because if you haven't tried it, you don't know what you're missing.
Gotcha. Okay, so we're in the store. We've picked up, what we think is going to be a good pair of boots. Do we want to talk about socks at all? Do we want to talk about?
Yeah, we can talk about that. Although before we move on that far, I think there's a couple other points that I would talk about. One, critical thing that a lot of people think about footwear is like waterproof, right? And almost everyone, especially for a hunting boot, thinks they want waterproof. And there's a good reason for that. If your feet are wet, first of all, you're not comfortable. Second, you're more likely to be cold, right? And that's an issue. One thing I like to remind people is the same thing that keeps water out, it also keeps it in.
I know.
And so just think about what type of hunt are you going to be doing, and what are the odds that you're going to be traveling in areas where water could go over the top. Because if you've got a Gore-Tex type footwear or some other proprietary membrane that manufacturer put in there, if that water goes in, your feet are wet, and they're going to probably be wet the rest of your hunt. Especially if it's cold outside, they're not going to dry really quickly. Mm-hmm. So there's a case to be made in some situations that a well-draining footwear could actually make more sense. Okay. And you could go with like a waterproof sock or something like that instead, so that you don't have all this water weight, because walking in squishy footwear is no fun for anybody, right? So, having said that, waterproof boots do make a lot of sense, and most people consider, Gore-Tex still to kind of be the king of the waterproof lining, but there are some good brands out there, I don't have any affiliation with them whatsoever, but I've worn a lot of Keen footwear. It's actually very comfortable for me. They use something called Keen Dry. It's a proprietary material, and I've had very good experience with it.
Too.
And so, that's one example of a company that's not using a name brand waterproofing material that I think is a very good product.
Okay.
In terms of that, other things that you might want to consider before we move on to the other stuff is a good lacing system. The further down the toe that the lacing system goes, the more you can open and close the boot to control the volume of that boot. So if the lacing were to stop here and you didn't have any ability to lace further down, you're just limited on how much you can control the volume in the foot, in the forefoot. And so that's another thing that I like to look at, especially when we're talking about stiffer footwear. And then when it comes to laces, laces can also make or break footwear. A lot of people don't really think about lacing being that critical, But there are lacing techniques that you can do, and we might do a little mini close-up of that sometime, because there are surgeon's knots and different things that you can actually put in to sort of isolate pressure in different places and make one part of the boot tighter than another part of the boot, and so on and so forth. So again, if you're working with someone and they're helping you get fit with a pair of boots, they should be familiar with some of these kinds of terms and techniques in order to make the footwear fit the best. But first and foremost, you'd rather just find a pair of boots that fits great without having to do any of that stuff, right? But for whatever reason, some of us sometimes need a little bit of extra, kind of technique to make things work properly.
Well, and I think you also, as you age, I have noticed this. I have to do different things in my boots.
Yeah.
We don't need to go down that rabbit hole,
Sure.
but it's just gonna. It may be good to know how to handle some of those things, and maybe
Definitely.
today you need a little more room, and tomorrow you need a little tighter. So
Right, and as seasons change, obviously, and it's a good segue into the sock thing.
Mhm.
Like, obviously, we're wearing thicker socks typically when it's cold out, but to sort of jump into the whole sock thing, thicker isn't always better when it comes to warmth. Most of us have experienced, if you've hunted very long, you've had cold feet, right? It happens to all of us. So conventional wisdom often will kind of make you think, okay, I need thicker socks, right? But the problem is, the thicker those socks get, the tighter the boot gets, and your circulation goes down. And that's a big problem. You need good circulation in your footwear, and if you don't, you're gonna have cold feet unless you're just walking all the time.
Mhm.
But if you're a deer hunter, you're not walking all the time.
Right.
At least very few of us are anyway. Even if you're not a full-time stand hunter, you're gonna have periods of time where you need to sit and be still.
Mhm.
And getting your sock boot combination kind of dialed in really goes a long way to managing the moisture in your feet from sweating, right? So that's another component of the sock that's very important. But also to keeping your feet warm. And I guess to that note, when it comes to moisture management, one of the things that I think nowadays most people are familiar with, but I don't like to make assumptions. Not only socks, but really in most places in terms of the fabric that you wear against your body, you typically want to avoid cotton, right? Because if cotton gets wet, it's going to stay wet, it's not going to be comfortable, it's cold, clammy, and all these kinds of things. And so nowadays, there's really kind of two choices that folks are going to go with when it comes to socks. The number one is typically merino wool, and it's an amazing fabric for a lot of reasons that we'll probably get into later on another one if we get into clothing systems and stuff like that. But merino, comes from a sheep. It's incredibly good at moisture management, at temperature control. It's soft against the skin. A lot of people that have had negative experiences with wearing old school wool and rag wool and things like that can wear merino no problem.
Yep.
And it really is kind of the ideal, footwear fabric or sock fabric. The other one would just be synthetic. There are a few folks out there that are particularly sensitive to wool, and if you're one of those folks, then you can go with some type of poly sock. There are some pretty good ones out there. Wigwam is a company off the top of my head that makes some nice socks that are good hunting socks that don't have any wool in them, if you're concerned about that.
Okay. Now, here in Arkansas, our deer and bear seasons open up at the end of September.
Right.
And so I'm fully expecting to be hiking around in quite a bit of heat.
Yep.
And so one of the challenges that I have specifically, I've got a narrow foot that's long and skinny, which I think people could probably tell by looking at the boots, but and I've kind of found that I'll wear these smart wool socks, which is a thicker sock. I mean, I wear these pretty much all the time that I'm hunting, even when it's hot outside. They're a little hot. I'm not gonna lie, they're a little bit hot.
Sure.
But what are some ways to manage that, I guess, on the heat side of things?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different things that you can do. One of them is just like you on your body, you wear a lining system. You can do the same thing with your foot. So you can wear a liner, or you can, it doesn't even have to necessarily be a liner, but some people have had good results from wearing 2 thinner socks instead of 1 thick sock. I encourage people to experiment with that though, because everybody's kind of different. Some folks like it, some not so much. Excuse me. The other thing is, as far as, socks go and the whole, managing the moisture and all that type of stuff, is there's an interesting sock out there that I don't do this personally, but I've had multiple people tell me that they've had good results with this. There's a brand called Injinji, and they make the toe socks. And people like to make fun of them, right? And I'm guilty of that myself. I'll admit it. It's like, toe socks, really? But I have a couple of friends that wear the toe socks first. And what happens is because you have fabric that's around each one of your toes, it actually manages the moisture and pulls it away from your foot.
Okay.
And it transfers it to the outer, thinner sock.
So you're warmer,
So
actually.
you're warmer, drier, and it actually really does. Now, and again, this is not from my personal experience, but I have had people, and I need to try it myself because it's probably more information than everybody wants to know, but my feet sweat horrible. Like, I just can't keep my feet dry all the time. I don't know
You're
what
probably
it is.
not rowing that boat by yourself.
Right. So, but I have had more than one person kind of switch to that. So just maybe do a little research on your own, read about them.
Okay.
And I don't know that Injinji is kind of the only one,
Okay.
but that's what they do, is they make the toe sock, so to speak.
Okay. That's
But if you've had trouble managing moisture in your feet, you always have cold feet, or for whatever reason you've just been unhappy with your sock combination, a liner or a very lightweight sock from them, coupled with whatever thickness sock you need to go over that's appropriate for the temperature and the type of footwear that you've got, could be a good system.
Okay.
To go with that.
All right. Well, we're running up here. We're about 30 minutes in, so our intention is to try to keep these manageable, and we could probably sit here and nerd out for quite a while longer. Let's talk real quickly though before we wrap this one up. I've got my boots, I've got my socks, I'm out on the trail, and disaster strikes. Walk really quickly, like what are the common things that I could run into, and how do I fix them?
Sure. So obviously, poor fitting footwear or new footwear obviously can be hard on your feet, right? So blisters are one of the things that people often think about. That could be on your heel, it could be bottom of your toes, really anywhere on your foot. The best way though with blisters is prevention on the front end. You don't want to wait to the point where an actual blister fully develops. If you feel that hot spot coming on, or if you're prone to having issues because you've hiked in the past and you're like, man, I've got that spot on my heel that's always kind of been a tough thing. There are some really good blister products out there that you can use. Some actually don't. One of the old school things is throw some duct tape on your foot, right?
Yeah.
Don't do that. I don't recommend it personally. Many people are allergic to the glue,
material.
right? Adhesive and duct tape. When you pull it off, it's going to rip the skin off with it. It's just bad all the way around, and it's not breathable. Even some simple pharmaceutical companies like Band-Aid and stuff like that now are producing some really nice blister-specific, breathable adhesive bandages that are a much better choice. So those would be a good thing to add on if you feel that hot spot coming on. There's even some products out there, and if we want, we can put it in some notes or something if we need to, but it's actually a product that is merino wool, and you put it against the spot that you're worried about, and it basically sticks to the sock. It works itself in, and it stays put. It's pretty interesting, and it just provides extra padding, for that. So as far as blisters go, prevention is the best thing that you can do. If you do get a blister, obviously it makes sense to have a small, first aid type kit with you so that you can deal with that. Take care of yourself as best as you can so that you can get out as comfortably as possible. Things other than that that could happen would be, simple things like a broken shoelace or something like that. I don't go anywhere without a little bit of paracord. In fact, a great way to make your own shoelaces is to take a piece of paracord, however long the lace is, cut it, pull the guts out of it so it lays flatter and it'll knot and hold a little bit better, and then use the sheath of that paracord and then just burn the ends so they don't come unraveled. And that's a good, real quick makeshift.
I got some boots that need that repair.
Yeah, so that's an easy thing to do if you've got paracord laying around, to get yourself, a nice set of new laces if you need it in the field. And then finally, I don't know that I would recommend everyone to carry this unless you already have some aging footwear. But there is a company called Gear Aid that makes a product called Free Sole, and it's basically glue for your footwear, and it works really good. It's not ideal in the field because your boots are going to be filthy, right? They got mud, or they're wet, and in order for the glue to work really well, it needs to be clean and dry.
Yep.
And so it's not ideal for like a field repair situation, but at home, if you've got places where, you've maybe some small separation or something like that, and you've got a footwear that otherwise you really like, you can use that Free Sole product to repair those and get more life out of your footwear.
Okay.
So, cool.
All right. Well, so, we've probably just barely scratched the surface, but, hopefully from this intro video, folks will have some idea how to go out and find some footwear that will help them get deeper in the backcountry this fall and enjoy being out there. We certainly aren't here to tell you have to spend a ton of money on anything that you're going to buy to go hunting. I don't think our outdoor pursuits need to be all about showing up in a full-on kit that you spent thousands of dollars for. But there are areas where you need to really make sure you're making a good decision, and we both feel pretty strongly that footwear is one of those that you need to buy quality, and it will last you a good long time if you do.
Yeah, think about it as in terms of an investment in yourself. It's this piece of gear that you're buying, but every time you go, you're wearing footwear. You buy a rain jacket, that rain jacket stays in your pack probably most of the time. Yeah, when you need it, you really need it, but the shoes are always, or the boots or whatever, they're always on your feet. So, and if your feet are uncomfortable, you're not happy and you're not going to have a good experience. So that's why it's one place that it makes sense to make that investment in that area. And if you have to save, maybe pick some other areas that are less important to your comfort.
Buy cheaper bullets.
Never know, right?
No, that's bad. That's terrible advice.
Right, there's an argument for somebody waiting to have.
Drink less coffee.
I don't know. That's a tough
one
too.
too.
Everyone's got their line, right?
I know. Well,
anyway.
we'll be back with some more videos in the coming weeks. So we hope you've enjoyed this one, and I guess get out there and break in a pair of boots.
Yeah, this was helpful. And if you have any questions at all, just message us, whatever, and we'll be happy to, if we can't answer the question, we'll do our best to point you into a place where you can find the answer to that question. We appreciate you, taking this time here to watch this evening, and good luck this season.
Yeah, you bet.